Welcome back. In this video we're going to be making the player movement script for basic top-down movement, so you can see you can go up, down, left and right, and we're also going to be implementing diagonal movement. As well as this we have a speed variable which we can change, so if I move that up it's going to be insanely fast, but that's for use later if we want to change it. So yeah, let's get straight into it. Right, so welcome back. You may have noticed one difference between the last video and this one, and that is that I'm now using a Mac system. The reason for this, as you may have noticed from the last video, was that on my Windows OS the audio quality wasn't that great and it kept on dipping in and out. So I hope that it'll be better using this the Mac rather than the Windows system. Everything still should be the same for you in comparison to the Mac and Windows versions of Unity. If there is anything different, I'll point it out when we get there, but I don't think there will be. So yeah, I'm gonna open up Unity. I've set up a new project that's exactly the same as what we set up in the last video, so there shouldn't be any differences. You see we've got the audio manager and game manager still here. And oh, one thing, I should rename this to LVO1 and reload the scene. Yep, okay, so now we're exactly where we were in the last video. The thing I want to do in this video is I want to create the basic player movement mechanism. So I'm just going to open up, I want to open up the game on a side, so maybe here. And I'm just gonna go and load that up. Right, so that way we can see what we're making, and it's like we have kind of a guide. We'll run that. So the basic premises are that it's a top-down game that's the art style kind of makes it look kind of, I don't know, maybe like 2.5D, I guess. But the idea is the player movement script is going to be pretty basic, because it's just going to be the top-down movement, and we don't have to worry about jumping and all that kind of stuff. So let me just move this audio. Yeah, so as you can see, when I move, I'm either moving up, down, left or right, and there's no other kinds of, there's no jumping, as I said, there's no crouching, there's nothing like that. One thing though is we do have diagonal movement. Just to get to a place where I can show that, perhaps here. Yeah, so if I hold down A and S, then I'm moving diagonally to the bottom left, and if I hold down S and D, and yeah, I'd move diagonally to the bottom right, and so on, so on. So that's basically all we've got to make for the player movement script. Of course, that, and move over here. So first of all, what we want is some kind of player object, something that we can move. And so for now, we're going to do something that's called prototyping. So basically setting out the base mechanics of a game. So that all the functionality of the game is there, but the polish isn't. So what we want to do is we want to create an empty game object, and we're going to name this player. I'm trying to think whether we want to put the script on the player itself or in a child object, and I think we should be fine to just go ahead. Yeah, we should just we should be fine to just go ahead and first of all let's add something so we can see this player. So I'm going to use something called a sprite renderer, and to get this, the sprite renderer is a component, and a component is something that's on an object that gives that object functionality. So you can currently see that it's automatically got a transform, and this relates to its space in the game world. What I'm going to do, so I'm going to click add component here and type in sprite renderer, and that should give me this option here. The icons may be different depending on what Unity version you're on. Yeah, so I'm just going to go sprite renderer and I'm going to click it, and this is going to generate this component which is collapsible, and it's giving me these kind of options that I can manipulate on the sprite renderer. So as I said, we're prototyping. I just want to get something really basic so we can see the player actually moving, and to do that I'm gonna click this circle icon here where it says sprite and select any of these default kind of preloaded in sprites that are with any Unity editor's default build. I'm just gonna go with the UI sprite for now. You can see it's kind of off center, so I'm gonna go into my transform, right click and press reset, and that'll change all my values to 0. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and take the scaling tool and scale this up so that it's pretty visible. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to write the script for this. So what I'm going to do is over here in my assets folder, I'm going to right click and create a new folder just so that we're staying organized, and I'm going to call this scripts. I'm going to go into scripts, and then I'm going to create a new C# script, and I'm going to call this player controller. Now you can call this whatever you like, but I'm calling this player controller because it's not just going to handle player movement. For now, yes, all it's going to handle is the player movement, but eventually we want to add interactability and all that kind of stuff. We want to add the animation, sound, all those kind of things that make a game, and I want to keep them all in this one script. As long as they're all related to the player. So I'm going to name it player controller. Now if you've named this something different, just remember that wherever I write or say player controller, you need to type in what you named your script. So I'm gonna come over here to my player, and now I'm gonna drag. There's two ways you can do this actually. You can either drag and drop this over here, not there, there. I'm just going to close out this material thing, and you'll see that you've got a new component. To remove a component, by the way, just right click and click remove component. And then the other way you can do this, you can click add component, and you can search for the name. You can search for the name of this script. So what we've named it is player controller, and you'll see it comes up here as one of our available components. Now we want to actually write the script, because the script's not going to be doing much on its own. So I'm going to double click it, and should be opening up. For Windows, I believe that now the default editor it'll open up in is Visual Studio. For me, it's opening it up in brackets. So just gonna say nope. Okay, so it doesn't really matter what editor you're in, as long as it suits you and it works. First things first, though, I haven't really used brackets much, so I'm just gonna right. I'm gonna close that out, close that out, close that out. I'm gonna close everything. Right. I'm gonna open the preferences. You know, I'll leave this for later, wasting time. Close those two. And let's go back into Unity and open that file back up. There we go. Right, there we go. Sorry about that. Now, what we've got to do now is we've got to write the script. So first of all, let's go over what this script is looking like. We've got over here the public class player controller. So it's defining a class, and a class is it's going to be all the things related to this functionality element of the script. So all our moving and all the variables we want to set, they're all going to be within this class. you can see the class is it's got the keyword public before it, and that just means that it can be accessed from any script, which we want it to be, so that we can do things to the player from another object. Next up, you got the name player controller. Now this is the name of our script as well, which is why I said where I say player controller, you need to remember what you called your script, because to access this public class we're going to need to call player controller. So now in here we've got the two default functions that Unity always sets us up with, which is start and update. We are going to be using them both, but for now I feel like just starting it on a clean slate. For you, don't worry about it, you can leave them in, but I just want to make it more easier to understand. Throughout this series I'm going to be using comments so that whatever I do you can understand. Just remember though, if you don't understand anything, you can always leave a comment in the comments section and I will get back to you and explain it to the best of my ability. Right, so first of all we need something called a rigid body. For a rigid body, what we need is it to be it's gonna control the physics of our player. Okay, so sorry about that, I just had to quickly pause the video. I don't know if it was too noticeable, but I just needed to download some more software onto this machine that I usually have on my Windows. Console 2D. This is just so I can demonstrate what I'm trying to say. I feel like a visual reference may be more kind of easier to understand. So as I was saying, if this is our player, they're moving in a 2D space like that. They're not moving in a 3D space, which would be something like this. So what we have here, this is the Z-axis, this is the Y-axis, and this is the X-axis. Whereas on the 2D scale, all we have is the Y-axis and the X-axis. So to move this player, we need something that we can move him with. And in Unity, one method to do this is called a rigid body. What the rigid body is going to do is we can access the velocity of our player. And the two ways we can do this is either using a vector 3 or a vector 2. And all that implies is whether we have 3 dimensions or 2 dimensions. And so because we're using this model here, we're going to need 2 dimensions. So what we'll be using is the vector 3, and what we're going to do is we're going to modify the velocity using a new vector 3. Sorry, not vector 3, vector 2. It'll probably make more sense once we write the code, so if you don't understand, just follow through for now, and you'll get it. I'll explain it once we've finished. So, the first thing we need to do is we need to create those variables. And the first of those variables, as I said, is the rigid body variable. And to do that, we need to access the type rigid body. Okay, it's not auto-completing for me. I'm going to need to fix this before the next video, but rigid body. You know what? Just give me a minute. I'm going to switch off. I'm going to see if I can change my settings on brackets or kind of get it onto some other IDE that I'm more used to, because I want to show it to you with all syntax highlighting and that kind of stuff, so just give me a minute. Right, so sorry about that, I feel like brackets isn't the kind of best way to demonstrate this, so what I've done is I've gone and changed my Unity default editor, and if that's something you'd like to do, all you've got to do is go click Unity, Preferences. It should open up this kind of menu. It should start in General, then go under External Tools, External Script Editor, and then you can either select whatever is already here, or you can hit Browse and select the application of your preferred editor. So what I've done is I've gone and set that to Visual Studio Code, so now when I open this up, we should see it in Visual Studio Code, not brackets. And there you go, all the syntax highlighting is there and it's looking much better. Dismiss that. Alright, so where were we? We need to create the rigid body variable. And to do that, what we've got to type is rigid body 2D. Okay, and now we need to give this a name, because that is the variable's type, and I'm going to call that RB. And no, just RB. The next, so that's where we're gonna store the actual rigid body component that's on our player. So the rigid body is gonna be a component on our player. So when we come back around here, what we gotta do once we finish writing the script is add another component that's going to be the rigid body 2D. Right. So the next thing we need to do is we need to access the player's input, right? So we want to know what buttons and the player is pressing, so we know where we actually want to move this player. And to do that, we're going to be using a float. Well, two floats actually. A float is a value with a decimal point, and using a float means we're going to be more accurate in where we're going to move the player. So I'm going to need two floats, one for the horizontal axis, and one for the vertical axis. You can name these whatever you like, it's up to you. Just again remember that you need to use these variable names when you're calling them. The next thing I want to do is create some kind of limiting variables and speed variables. So we're only going to need two of these, I think. And what they're going to do is they're going to kind of dictate how our player moves. So what we've got currently is something to move our player. We know where the user wants to move our player, but we don't know how to kind of smooth this. We need a middle layer in between so that we don't have like jerky movements or insanely fast movements or insanely slow movements. So the first thing I want to do is create a public float, because I want this to be accessed from the editor. Remember, public means that it's not just contained to this script. Public means it can be accessed from anywhere. I want to create a public float, and I'm going to call it move limiter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to directly set it here, just so that we don't get a null error if we forget to set it. And to do that, I'm just going to put an equals, and I'm going to give it a value of 0.7f, and the f is just telling us that it's a float. You could also just put 0.7 here, and that wouldn't make a difference. It's up to you. The next thing I want to do is another public float, and I want to call this run speed. This is gonna be the speed at which our player moves. I'm gonna set this by default to 20.0f. And remember, in C#, what we gotta do is at the end of each statement we want to write a semicolon, and that just tells the editor that we're done. And we can move on to the next executable bit of our code. Right. The next, I think for now these are the only variables we're gonna need. Yeah, because it's gonna cover all the aspects of basic top-down movement. So logically speaking, the next step is we want to give this rigid body something to access. So if you see down here with our move limiter, we've already given it a value, but currently for the rigid body we don't have a value. And I want to do this right at the beginning, when our program gets executed. I don't, however, want to do this for the horizontal and vertical, because then we'll only get a value right at the start and never again. I want these to keep on getting values from the user. So first, I'm going to start with the start function. I don't know if it'll autocomplete this for me. Nope. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to type private, because I don't want this to be accessed from anywhere else, void start. And then this is how we're declaring the function, and what we want to say inside the function we need to put between curly braces. So I'm just going to set it up like that, and there we have the basic syntax for a function. Now, what I want to do in this function is I want to set the value of RB, which, as you know, is our variable for the rigid body, and I want to set it equal to get component, which is what we're going to use to ask the script to look for a component, and as I've said before, a component is something that's attached to this player. Get component, and now I need to supply the type of this component. So if I go back here again, what you can see is the types of the component. For example, this component here, its type is transform. The component here, its type is sprite renderer. Component here, the type is player controller. So the type we're going to be looking for is the type of rigid body 2D. So all you got to do is put that there and then put some brackets at the end and a semicolon to say that we're done with that statement. Right, so that should be now getting this the rigid body. That we need to remember to set the component when we go back to the editor. But for now, that's all we're going to need in the start function. Next thing we want to do is we want to have an update function. Now the start and update functions we've used are default kind of reserved functions that Unity has. Start is a function that Unity will look for, and if it's there, Unity will run this function when the game starts. Update is another one of these functions, and if it's there, Unity will run this on every frame. A frame in a game is kind of like every kind of different picture in a sequence. So if you think about an animation, what we've got is different frames. So maybe I can demonstrate that here. If I kind of move this up a bit. Right, so each of these kind of numbers here are frames, different frames. If I get rid of this, add a new layer, frame demo. If I draw something on this frame, and then I make another frame, and then I make another frame here, what you'll see is, if I keep repeating this, range 1 to 3. You don't have to worry about this stuff. This is just a demo, by the way. What you will see is it's gonna go between these frames, and so every different picture here is a frame. In a game, it's the exact same thing. Just we're not making the frames. The frames are going to be made up of what we code, what we draw, and what the user kind of inputs into the game. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call that update function, again, private void. Just so you know, I've already explained what private is versus public, but void is the keyword we use to define a function. And I'm going to call the update function. Okay, so in the update function, what I want to do is I want to set the horizontal and vertical floats. And remember, because it's in the update function, these will be reset every frame. So it's going to provide smooth user input to what the player will see. So I'm going to set horizontal equal to, and now what I want to do is I want to get the input from the user. So I'm expecting them to use either the arrow keys or the worst keys for now. And I want to know when they press down, say, D or the right arrow, I want to know that that's where they're trying to go. And so to do this, I need to call the class input. And then on input, I need to call get axis raw. I could use get axis, but I want to take the basic raw function so I can perform everything I want to on this float. And now what I want to do is, if I show you here, how does the user actually get in this input? Because it's not like they just press D and it's just there. There has to be some kind of thing that's doing this, right? And to do that, if we can find it, I think edit project settings. Right, so in Unity by default we have something called the input manager, and it's got a load of axes. That's why we're calling input in reference to the input manager and get axes raw in reference we want to get one of these axes in its raw form. And what we're looking for here is the horizontal axes, and you can see that it's got positive buttons and an alternative positive button. This is telling us the two buttons we can use to call it. Negative is the opposite, by the way, but we won't need to use that yet. So you can see when we press the right button, a right arrow key, or when we press the D button, it's going to set that value into the horizontal axis. So what we want to do is we want to copy over this name, and we want to put it in a string in this function, like that. and then semicolon to end it. So what is this doing? It's saying that we're looking for this horizontal axis. We're going to find the value that it gives us, and we're going to set it into this float named horizontal. Okay, now we want to do the exact same for our vertical, right? So what I'm going to do is close that down. I'm going to copy the vertical name. I'm going to close the input manager, come back into Visual Studio, and I'm going to set the vertical variable equal to the same thing, so input.get axes raw, and the only difference is I'm going to be looking for the axis named vertical this time. Right, so now what have we got? What we've got is we've set basically all our variables. We've set the horizontal, we've set the vertical, we've set the rigid body, and right at the top what we've done is we've given move limiter and run speed default settings, but because they're public we can change these in the editor if we see fit. The next thing I want to do is I want to actually move this player, and to do that I don't want to do it in the update function. Although it does happen every update, it's going to be kind of jerky if on the same time we get the input from the user it immediately moves. What I want to do is I want to provide a small delay. And to do that I'm going to use fixed update. So fixed update doesn't run every frame, but every major frame, kind of. It'll decide this, I think. And so it won't be exactly the same time that we get this input in. So to do this I'm going to call private void, and again this is another reserved function. I'm going to call fixed update, like that. Then I'm just going to open up the curly braces so it's ready as a function. Now, what I need to do first of all is I would like to check something. I want to make sure that we can move our player diagonally first, right? And what I'm going to use for that is I'm going to use the move limiter. And I only want them to move diagonally, right? If I have inputs for both horizontal and vertical, because if they're just holding down D, I don't want them to move in a diagonal fashion. But if they're holding down W and D, then I do want them to do that. So what I'm going to do now is use a conditional. This conditional is called if. And what if is going to do is it's going to check something for us. And what I want to check if horizontal is not equal to 0. And to do that I'm going to use exclamation mark equals. That basically means not equal to 0. And now I don't want it to just check if horizontal is not equal to 0. I wanted to check that, and sorry, one sec. I wanted to check if horizontal is not equal to 0, but I also wanted to check if vertical is not equal to 0. So to say and, I've just got to type 2 ampersands, just like that, and now I can type a second condition. And the second condition is going to be if vertical is not equal to 0 as well. Now what I want to do is I want to apply the move limiter to our horizontal and vertical floats. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type horizontal times equal. So what I'm using here is the star sign and equal. So what I'm doing is I want to set horizontal equal to horizontal times whatever's coming past here. Another way to do this is I could also type horizontal equals horizontal times and then the move limiter, which is what we're going to be using, but it's just quicker to use times equals. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say horizontal times equals move limiter. And then I'm going to do the exact same for vertical. So vertical times equals move limiter. And now this is only going to happen if we're trying to move in a diagonal direction. So if we're not moving directly straight, forward, backward, anything like that. So the next step now is to actually apply this, right? So what we want to do is, as I've said before, we want to access the velocity of the player. And so to do that, remember we have the rigid body. This is where it comes into use. going to type rb.velocity to access its velocity, and now I'm going to set its velocity equal to a new vector2. And now, so every other frame, kind of, it's going to change this velocity to be the values of, so for the x value, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have horizontal times run speed, and then for the vertical, for the y-axis, I'm going to have vertical times run speed again. And so what it's going to do, you see this comma here, this is separating two different parameters to the vector2 function. And the parameters we have on a vector2 are, as you can see, float x and float y. And so what this is going to do is it's going to move the player, this whole line, it's going to move the player to a new x and y coordinate. And those coordinates I want are horizontal, the horizontal value we have, times the run speed, because I don't want him to just jerk there, right? I want him to move at a certain speed. Then the exact same thing, but with vertical and run speed, and semicolon to finish off. So that should be it, I think, for this basic player moving script. I'm just going to go in and add some comments, as I said, so that it's easier to understand. I've already got the create variables. Set the value of the rigid body. Over here, what we're doing is we are getting inputs from the user. What we're doing here is we are first of all checking to see if we need to move diagonally, and if we are, what we're doing is we are applying the move limiter to the values. Over here, what we're finally doing is at the end we are applying the change to the player's x and y coordinates. So that should be the script done. Remember to save it, and then we'll head back into the Unity editor. Now just let this load in the changes. One sec. And it's ready. Now what we got to do is we need to remember on our player object we have the move limiter and run speed, and also we need to make sure we have a rigid body 2D for it to find. And so to do that, I'm going to add a component, rigid body 2D. Just like that. That's all you've got to do. Actually, one more thing I think is, let's take gravity down, because it's a top-down game, right? So we want to simulate, if there is any gravity, we want to simulate that ourselves, not let Unity think that we need to go, if it's here, it needs to fall down. That's not what we want to do. Now, one more thing we need on this is a collider, and a collider is basically it's like announcing the thing's presence. It's giving us a space in this world. So currently this hasn't got anything to tell us it's actually there. It's literally just a sprite there. We want to say that it is occupying space here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a box collider for now. A box collider 2D, by the way, because we are making a 2D game. And you can see a green outlining here. That's just denoting we've got a box collider and it's working. Right, so with all that done, we should be ready to test this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this play button up here. I think the shortcut for that is also Control P or Command P on a Mac. And when this starts to run, you'll see that turn blue. And I'm pressing A now, by the way, and we're moving left. I'm pressing D, we're moving right. Pressing W, we move up. And D brings us down. So also W and A moves us diagonally, and that moves us or if I press two keys at once, it'll move us diagonally. One thing I want to do is I want to take the speed down to like 10. Let me just make those changes there, and let's see if that looks a bit better. 1 sec to run. Takes a while to run. Okay, yeah, it's run. So what I'm going to do is just try it out, and yeah, it looks like our player movement script is working as expected. If you're following along, this is what you should be seeing by now. If you're not seeing this and you have a problem, first of all, just go through the code, see if you missed something. But if you're still struggling, remember you can always leave any problems or anything into the comment section, and I will get back to you. Another option for you to do is you can also reach out to me on the Twitter page, which I will put in the description. But yeah, before we end this video, I'm just gonna make this look a bit nicer by scaling the player down, because currently he is looking a bit too big. So I just scaled him down there. I'm gonna rerun this, and when it buffers through, we should see, yeah, this is looking a bit nicer. If you'd like, it's up to you totally, but I'm just gonna bring this down again, maybe 4. Let's have a look. Yeah, nah, maybe a bit more. How about 2? Not 42, just 2. Let's have a look. Maybe 3. Yeah, 3 looks a bit better. Or does it? This is up to you to decide. It's just whatever you think makes your game feel the best. And I think for now, yes, 4 is looking a nice value. Just remember though that these values will change while the game is playing. You can't save. If you try to save it, you must exit play mode to save the scene. So if you want to save all the changes you made to the component, just come over to the component, right click, and say copy component. Then end the game, and you'll see that none of those changes applied because you couldn't save it. Just go back to the component, right click on it again, this time say paste component values, and this will just put in those values that selected earlier. So now when we run the game, in a second, we should see that the changes we like are there. Right, so I'm gonna end the video here. Yeah, we're nearing on 35 minutes. So if you've got any feedback, queries, problems, anything like that, just leave it in the comment section. What we did today was the basic player movement. I think next time what we can probably do is maybe get the camera to follow the player, because currently if we move out of the viewpoint of the camera, we don't see the player anymore. And in the game, if we have a look, that's not what we want to do. Can you see that the camera's following the player, so that the player is always in the center of our screen, even though he's moving somewhere. So that's what we'll, I think, probably implement next time. But yeah, for now, I'm going to end the video here. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.